Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, April the 16th, 2021. It is Woke Friday here on the KMG show, and I'm going to start by speaking about Lindsay Ellis. Who is Lindsay Ellis? Asks the website called meow.com. Well, I wondered that too, because I saw that Lindsay Ellis was trending on Twitter, and people very, very upset about this woman, and very, very upset about the so-called attempt to cancel her. According to Wiki, Lindsay Carroll Ellis, born 1984, is an American film critic, YouTuber, and author. From 2008 to 2014, she was part of the Channel Awesome production company under the name The Nostalgia Chick, a counterpart to The Nostalgia Critic. In 2014, as she ended her affiliation with Channel Awesome to focus more on long-form video essays, her debut novel, Axiom's End, published in 2020, became a New York Times bestseller. On her YouTube channel, Ellis frequently makes videos about Walt Disney Pictures films. Yes, endless trash. I think the problem that, well, first of all, she's an internet thought, one of many. But the problem is that she's not very intersectional. Again, according to Wiki, Ellis is bisexual. Ooh. As of 2019, she and her husband live in Long Beach, California. Yeah, bisexuality doesn't go very far in the intersectionality wars. Oh, here's a piece from her from 2015. Bisexual privilege, bisexual erasure. Ugh. Okay. So back to Meow. Who is Lindsay Ellis? YouTuber's old anti-Asian tweets dug up after take on Raya and Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think if you're white and people of color are telling you something you've posted is coming off as racist, then the right thing to do is listen to them, one tweeted. And this story is by Pratna Sarkar, whose intersectional claims are obviously much greater than Lindsay Ellis's. A YouTuber author, Lindsay Ellis, found herself at the center of a troll fest that was triggered by her tweets in which she called fantasy series Raya and the Last Dragon reduxes of Avatar: The Last Airbender. The reactions were a mixed bag. While some chose to post old tweets of hers, which they claimed were anti-Asian in nature, there were a few who defended her. Her latest tweets, dated March 26th, have been deleted since outraged keyboard warriors slammed her for putting two different pieces of work under the same category. Also watched Raya and the Last Dragon, and I think we need to come up with a name for this genre that is basically Avatar: The Last Airbender reduxes. It's like half of all young adult fantasy published in the last few years anyway, one of her posts read. Yes, I can see how terribly controversial and anti-Asian that would be. So what's going on here? Okay. So in the United States, Asian men and women, often elderly, are being attacked, often savagely, by black men. What is responsible for this? Well, Donald Trump, of course, because he's responsible for everything that bad that happens in the world. But more generally, white people. Yes, white supremacy, white privilege, etc., etc. That is why black men are savagely beating up old Asian men and women. Anyway, I can see where if you squint, I was implying all Asian-inspired properties are the same, especially if you are already privy to those conversations where I had not seen them. But the basic framework of TLA is becoming popular in fantasy fiction outside of Asian-inspired stuff, Lindsay tweeted later. possibly in an effort to explain her earlier tweet, which some thought exhibited a lack of research. Okay. If the cultures seem the same, you need to do more research, read a history book, Google, I don't know, broaden your mind. That bit about YA fantasy doesn't sit right with me. Like, how am I supposed to interpret it? That recent diverse YA fantasy are all the same to you? A user pointed out in a series of tweets, which appeared to be a criticism of Lindsay's rant. Yes, that's how it reads in the story, because we don't have editors anymore. However, there was another user who thought that Lindsay has a foot-in-the-mouth syndrome, but at the same time called out those who called some of her old tweets anti-Asian. I'm not going to get into the Lindsay Ellis thing. She definitely has foot-and-mouth syndrome, and I'm also not interested in watching either Raya or ATLA, ATM. But damn the gall of this guy claiming any kind of negative interaction equals anti-Asian, the user tweeted, and added screenshots of tweets done by @NoTotally earlier this month. Remember when well-known YouTubers Biggest Joel and the Lindsay Ellis were so casually anti-Asian that their followers tried to get me killed for 5 straight months and very nearly succeeded multiple times? Yeah, pics or BS. NoTotally posted on March the 22nd, along with several other tweets along the same line. I think if you're white and people of color are telling you something you posted is coming off as racist, then the right thing to do is listen to them and not get defensive and accusatorial back at them. Think about how exhausted they are first. Yes, exhaustion. It's an American pandemic. Sitting in front of a keyboard all day and sending off dozens or hundreds of furious tweets does not strike me as evidence of exhaustion. But then I am not a medical professional. Another shared a screen grab of a year-old tweet by Lindsay with a caption that read, "Choose your fighter, Lindsay Ellis, Bad Takes Edition. If the cultures seem the same, maybe you need to do more research," etc., etc. So what did Lindsay Ellis do in response to this? She posted a 100-minute video talking about her failures in the past, her failures to properly research and understand trash Asian-inspired movies, and I guess her general failure as a human being, because she's white, bisexual, but white, very white, blue-eyed, privilege, etc., etc. This is from Film Daily. Twitter war. Why did Lindsay Ellis post a 2-hour-long apology video? YouTuber Lindsay Ellis has been a name in the world of video essays. Her career started in the now thoroughly fallen from grace channel Awesome, where she was the nostalgia chick talking about nostalgia-based content, but more focused on My Little Pony and the like. You can see we're dealing with a serious woman here. Over time, however, she switched to more serious film and television criticism. It got ratcheted up. Her detractors got ratcheted up to 100 due to a now deleted tweet on Raya and the Last Dragon, which is not a movie that I'd ever heard of. And there's a whole bunch of tweets here, tweets. Oh dear, I worry cinemas closing will make us watch movies like Republicans. This is from Jeff Rauner at the Houston Press. The apparent closing of the River Oaks Theater is personally devastating to me because of my long history with the place as projectionist and cast director of Rocky Horror, where I met my life. Republicans, reactionary alt-right shouty men who illegally download stuff like Captain Marvel so they can tear it apart for its anti-man agenda. It's just, things have just fallen apart. The center cannot hold. Reactionary alt-right shouting men are illegally downloading Captain Marvel so they can tear it apart for its anti-man agenda. So if you search Lindsay Ellis on Twitter, gonna miss Lindsay Ellis having a Twitter. Sometimes she'd respond to my tweets and people would get mad at her, and I'd see every angry reply and I'd be like, there they go again. There they go. Elaine, who is on Patreon, her name is Ho, apparently. Artist of the Broken and the Beautiful. Universal Studios, Warner Brothers, Disney VR, creator of The Tempest and The Fire. It's disappointing that criticism by Asians in regards to Lindsay Ellis's tweet comparing Raya to ATLA has been subsumed by the overwhelming idea of cancel culture and what it means to a white person. Boo! She centered herself in what was criticism about Asian microaggression. Oh, I thought it was white microaggression. Wayon Appreciator tweeted, "Gonna hold the L and say the Lindsay Ellis video is actually real good and is neither an apology video nor a this is why I'm right video, but instead a yeah, here's dumb shit I've done. Now, does this deserve a decade and a half of harassment that leads to this?" Okay, and here's one of those memes on the highway where you can go straight or you can turn right. Going straight, make a follow-up tweet apologizing for problematic tweet. And the turn is make a 2-hour-long YT video explaining the motives for every problematic thing I've done. I don't know how these people manage to stay alive. I really don't. But of course, one wonders how much of this outrage is performative. In fact, how much of everything that we see and hear today is performative. According to Breitbart and Jacob Bliss, an NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll released Thursday found that a majority of Americans oppose woke corporations influencing everyday life. The poll asked registered voters if they support or oppose American companies using their public role, position, or events to influence political, cultural, or social change. The findings show that over half, 58%, oppose any type of corporation using its power to influence any type of political, cultural, or social change across the country. They also show that 35% did support the efforts by woke corporations, while 7% were unsure how to answer. Just a reminder that at 5:30 Pacific time, I will be discussing an excellent book which came out this year called The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, How Political Correctness Captured Big Business by Stephen R. Sukup. Let's go to the chat. Right from the top. Hello to GC Stahl, Dan, Tricky Hoop, Hopcasso 88, Chogokin 666. The Last Airbender on Theater Thursday when I just don't watch things like that. GC Style says Ontario Health pushing for 6 weeks lockdown. This province lives pandemic fear porn and Ford likely to fulfill their wish. I'll be talking about that in some detail in just a few minutes. Jogokin 666 says, told an older lady I'm friendly with that I thought Fauci was untrustworthy and petulant. She said I was buying into Trump propaganda. I said that Fauci was appointed by Trump. Jay Miller says, did you see that the Sun-Times censored and rewrote Jeremy Clarkson's article because the content was on how some people can't speak English in the UK? No, I did not see that, but I will check it out later. Mr. Chuck the Buck Norris says, my parents shamed me today for not taking the vaccine, accused me of believing everything on the internet, LOL. Well, what I see on the internet is a bunch of people saying, where are the vaccines? We need more vaccines. Why haven't you taken the vaccine? Why hasn't everyone taken the vaccine 2, 3, or more times? Do you want everybody to die? Are you a murderer at heart? That's what I see on the internet. A roulette crack says it must take hours for them to write anything, has to be PC proofed before released. Yes, I've seen many complaints about writing for the New York Times. I mean, writing freelance op-eds. because no, you can't say this, no, you can't say that, and they just bugger your copy about so much that it's rather pointless. What the opinion that you intended to express is not the opinion that is going to come out in the piece. You know, for the longest time, it was understood that op-eds were not treated like news stories. Op-eds were personal opinions, which you could agree with or not. GC Style says, was there any retort from Clarkson? Roulette Crack says, half the vaccines have not even passed the short-term test. Who's to say the other half won't pass a long-term test? Well, yeah, seeing the stuff, including especially from Globe and Mail reporters on Twitter, we have reached the apotheosis of scientism, that we have turned Canada into a country of 38 million lab rats. Chogakin 666 says torrenting equals fascism. Roulette Cracked, they will remove Kato from the Pink Panther film's stereotypical martial arts discrimination. Okay, Metal Mike, any thoughts on Ford's announcement today? Yes, I do, and we will get to that very shortly. This is from Adam Schrader at the Daily Mail. Tucker Carlson has hit back at Chelsea Clinton on Thursday night after she called on Facebook to ban him from the platform, saying that vaccinated people should return to normal life and not have to wear masks amid the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Clinton had chimed in on Twitter amid a spat between Carlson and Dr. Anthony Fauci about the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. Clinton said that Facebook should remove Carlson for spreading disinformation about COVID, adding, quote, Tucker Carlson consistently spews racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic hate and misinformation across his platforms. He doesn't deserve a microphone. Yes, QED. Carlson on Thursday night responded, mockingly describing Bill and Hillary Clinton's only child as an internationally renowned humanitarian and intellectual, and saying she's called today for Facebook to shut us down. He continued, Dr. Chelsea Clinton, and I believe she does have a PhD, is mad that we ask super obvious questions that everyone in the country should be asking. So does the vaccine, and there are a couple of them, do they work or don't they work? It's okay, you can tell us. Carlson noted that the CEO of Pfizer said earlier on Thursday that people may need a booster shot of his vaccine after a year. On the Centers for Disease Control website, it states, we're still learning how vaccines will affect the spread of COVID-19. After you've been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, you should keep taking precautions like wearing a mask, staying 6 feet apart from others, and avoiding crowds and poorly ventilated spaces in public places until we know more. A congressman, was it yesterday or the day before, asked Fauci some important questions. When do we get back to normal? He wouldn't answer the question. And then he talked about the tremendous loss of liberties suffered by Americans. And Fauci said, I don't consider them to be loss of liberties. I consider them to be public health, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Carlson on his show Wednesday said that he's been asking for months why vaccinated people have to live under the restrictions that the vaccines were supposed to eliminate while taking shots at Fauci. We're wondering if Fauci is telling Americans who've been vaccinated or who have recovered from the coronavirus itself that they aren't protected from future infections, Carlson said. Fauci had earlier in the day said that Carlson's questions that the coronavirus vaccines may not be effective because vaccinated people still have to wear masks is, wait for it, a conspiracy theory. Is the observation by Carlson that Fauci seems to be saying the opposite of what the head of the CDC, Rachel Walensky, is saying? Is that a conspiracy theory as well? Fauci in full. That's just a typical crazy conspiracy theory. Why would we not tell people if it doesn't work? To ask the question is to answer it. The data are overwhelming, Fauci said. In the 3 vaccines that have been approved for use in an emergency use authorization, the Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, and the Moderna, You had 30,000, 44,000, and 40,000 people in a clinical trial with an overwhelming signal of efficacy. Fauci added, so I don't have any idea what he's talking about. Well, you're stupid or you're lying. We were told by Justin Trudeau and many others, just bear with us here. Wait for the vaccine. When we get the vaccine, then life can go back to normal. Now they're saying no. Well, when? We're not going to tell you. Does that mean forever? Perhaps. Clinton then retweeted a post containing a screenshot of Carlson from his show and noting that Facebook had banned false claims about COVID-19 vaccines in December. Oh, Facebook has spoken. Again, QED. Clinton said that Carlson's comments were especially troubling given Republican men are currently most likely to say they're not interested in being vaccinated. I thought it was racial minorities who were most likely not to want vaccinations. That's what I've been hearing for weeks. Glenn Greenwald commented, please remove from the internet any content that displeases or otherwise causes any discomfort for Chelsea Clinton. Gareth Ike said, I imagine being hated by a Clinton is probably something to be worn as a badge of honor. Yeah. Chelsea Clinton is an authority. Exactly how she got to be an authority, we don't know. Well, we do know, because America is now a hereditary oligarchy. Missy Crane of the Wayne Dupree Show, an internet radio show, called the entire Clinton family crooks. Chelsea's parents are notorious crooks, and her father is a womanizer and an accused serial rapist. But this privileged little darling is calling on Facebook to ban an American patriot and good family man. So let's move on to the province of Ontario. And is it time to panic? Yes. No, actually, it was time to panic a year ago, 14 months ago. And it is the very lack of panic or insufficient panic that is responsible for the catastrophe that is apparently going on in Ontario. And somehow Trudeau is avoiding any negative comments for this. See, Canada was boasting that we're doing so much better than the United States and the rest of the world. No, the effects of COVID-19 have been pretty much the same all over the Western world in each Western country. But Doug Ford, that radical right-winger who apparently wanted to abolish government, has assumed the mantle of a dictator, and he's being cheered by leftists and progressives while being chided that he is not being dictatorial enough. This is from the CBC. Ford announces new restrictions as COVID-19 cases threaten to remain high all summer. Outdoor gatherings with people outside your household banned. Amenities like playgrounds shut down. No, you don't want children out in the sun and the fresh air. Everyone knows that the sun and fresh air are killers. Ontario will step up enforcement powers for police and extend its stay-at-home order to a minimum of 6 weeks in a bid to stem the exponential rise in COVID-19 cases, but won't institute paid sick days despite modeling showing that cases will remain high through the summer without additional support for essential workers. There was something I was going to say about Chelsea Clinton, that she has been invited, given, her expert status. Yes, just in, the Vatican has invited Chelsea Clinton, Dr. Fauci, New Age figure Deepak Chopra, and the CEOs of Moderna and Pfizer to speak at a May conference focusing on health and the soul. CNN's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Gupta, and model Cindy Crawford will be speaking as well. For decades now, I've been told, people worrying about a schism in the Catholic Church. Bring on the schism. I want the schism now. But back to Ontario. Speaking at a twice-delayed news conference Friday, Premier Doug Ford announced the stay-at-home order, first instituted April 8th for 4 weeks, will now be extended until May the 20th. Oh, so he's going to ban, after having banned Easter, and he's going to ban spring? Is he going to ban summer too? Effective 12:01 a.m. Saturday, outdoor gatherings will be prohibited except for members of the same household or one other person from outside that household who lives alone. Police will have the authority to ask anyone outside their residence to indicate their purpose for leaving home and provide their address. That includes stopping vehicles and potentially issuing tickets of approximately $750. Ford was asked whether the police were going to arrest people walking. He said, no, we're not going to arrest people walking, after saying just a few minutes earlier, yes, the police are going to arrest people for inessential walking. Non-essential construction will be shut down, and outdoor amenities like golf and playgrounds will be restricted. Retail capacity will be limited to 25% in all settings where in-store shopping is still permitted. Inspectors will also visit law offices, accounting firms, and other such locations to confirm that only essential workers are in the building. Effective 12:01 a.m. Monday, religious gatherings, weddings, and funerals will be limited to 10 people, whether indoors or outdoors. Also beginning Monday, Ford said there will be checkpoints at provincial borders with Quebec and Manitoba, with exceptions for essential travel. I've never shied away from telling you the brutal, honest truth, Ford said. We're losing the battle between the variants and vaccines. We're on our heels. Ford, along with Solicitor General Sylvia Jones, told reporters the stricter measures are necessary because of a lack of vaccine supply. However, health experts have repeatedly said vaccines alone cannot stop the surge of the virus. Then what good are they? Honestly, what good are they? How many lockdowns has Ontario had now? Are we into the fourth or fifth lockdown? Oh, just bear with us. This lockdown will take care of the problem, but it doesn't. Lockdowns don't work, which means we have to have more of them. That's what it means. I'm reminded of something that I once heard Malcolm Muggeridge say about the failure of socialism, that according to the experts, the solution to the failures of socialism is more socialism. And some very concerned person called Natalie Day in Ontario put up a video. Don't go to Hyde Park, that's in Toronto, to view the cherry blossoms. There will be millions of people there. Millions. This is where we went last year and we were all alone. Oh dear. Yes. A year ago, Torontonians were banned from looking at the just blossomed cherry trees in Hyde Park in Toronto. And now, no, you can't enjoy nature anymore because nature is dangerous. This woman, Natalie Day, had previously railed Easter. Yeah, Easter is responsible for the panic we're going through now. And I responded to her, perhaps we should cut down all the cherry trees and ban Christianity while we're at it. Would that satisfy you? Without stronger system-level measures and immediate support for essential workers in high-risk communities, high case rates will persist through the summer, Ontario's COVID-19 Science Advisory Table said Friday. In a statement, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association decried Friday's new measures as rights-slashing by Queen's Park and suggesting they could lead to a court challenge. It's a Black Friday, CCLA Executive Director Michael Bryant said, adding random police checks are unconstitutional and will result in a rash of racial profiling. Unifor, Canada's largest public sector union, also issued a statement urging the province to legislate paid sick days and fast-track vaccinations for all workers deemed essential. Yeah. Okay. And for a roundup of hysteria, we go to the CBC. Again, just hang on a second here. Ontario setting up checkpoints and borders with Manitoba, Quebec to limit entry amid surge of COVID-19. Ford announces more restrictions, new police powers to enforce extended stay-at-home order. Why isn't Doug Ford staying at home, by the way? Is it necessary for him to leave his house, seeing as that he has turned over legislative power to unelected bureaucrats? Video, Ontario doctor describes how catastrophic state of COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the most vulnerable. A Canadian Medical Association issues urgent call for unprecedented measures to fight the pandemic. So we're hearing about, well, martial law in Canada, the Emergency Measures Act. In 1970, after count them, two men were kidnapped by the separatist FLQ, Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, put the entire country under martial law and suspended habeas corpus. And hundreds of people were arrested, where they sat in prison 4 months, not being charged with anything. What's bred in the bone, as they say. David Fissman, who's a professor interested in plagues, pestilences, and politics, one of the most dangerous Canadians, according to Ontario MPP Randy Hillier, says the federal government needs to invoke the Emergency Measures Act and step in Ontario. You can't abandon Canadians to a government that doesn't give a goddamn about them. Apparently, there is still some social and economic activity in Ontario, and this does not go far enough for Professor Fissman. Alberta Leonidas writes, it should be codified law that if a leader enacts Emergency Measures Act, that he must not be able to run for re-election. There must be a price paid to flirt with such measures. I don't know that that is a majority opinion. Holly asked, this may be a really stupid question, but is there a way for the federal government to step in and take over in Ontario? Because it feels like if they have that ability, the moment is definitely here. And Nora Loreto, who describes herself as Canada's least obnoxious writer, socialist, one half of Sandy and Nora, says, through the Emergency Measures Act, I imagine this is very possible. Well, there's one reason why Justin Trudeau would not want to invoke the Emergency Measures Act, because then all of the failures, so-called, of governmental response to COVID-19 would be on his shoulders and his shoulders only. And he's already been hammered quite enough. Oh, vaccines, we can't get vaccines. Oh, I haven't done anything wrong, says Trudeau. There's no, in all of these stories, do you notice we're not hearing about a death toll? We're not hearing about hospitals, ICU wards being overwhelmed. It's simply the number of cases and how many of these cases are real. The problems with these tests are well known now, and I'll get to that a little bit later. 6-week stay-at-home order, strict new measures needed to control third COVID-19 wave in Ontario. Experts say disaster scenario predicted by Science Table in February now becoming reality, co-chair has. So I'm just going to, okay, cases. All right, cases. I'm not looking at numbers of deaths here. So if all of these people are getting COVID-19, or they're supposed to have COVID-19, and COVID-19 is just so deathly, where are the numbers of the bodies? Why aren't you leading with that? This would, perhaps because it would lead one to suggest that COVID-19 is not actually that deadly. Yes. I have to go to this. One of the most disgusting things that I have read during this whole sanitary dictatorship. This is from Bruce Arthur with the Toronto Star. All those people gasping for air. This government has failed Ontario in the most unthinkable, unforgivable way. And there's a picture of a 60-year-old COVID-19 patient fights for his life, desperately gasping for air as healthcare staff provide life-saving medical care in an emergency situation in the intensive care unit at the Humber River Hospital on Tuesday. The patient was intubated and put on a ventilator successfully. Bruce Arthur, a former jock sniffer, begins, "The catastrophe is here. It's understandable if you can't imagine how bad this is or how bad it will get, because even people in healthcare can't believe it. Friday, the Ontario government is expected to introduce stricter public health restrictions for the third time in 3 weeks because Ontario's panicked pleading attempts to negotiate with the virus were always doomed. The only question now is how catastrophic it becomes." See, you don't negotiate with a virus. It's true. You can't negotiate with a virus. What you do is declare war on it. You tell the virus to leave, or else, you will know the reason why. "There are no good options anymore," said a science table source. If there are no good options anymore, why does the science table exist? Why don't you just pack up? We're past that point. Usually, the province's independent volunteer science table delivers a Wednesday briefing to cabinet before presenting data to the media and public on a Thursday. This week, following the cabinet briefing, the Thursday science table briefing was moved to Friday, with cabinet suddenly debating further restrictions. The projections are said to be between 12,000 and 18,000 cases per day by the end of May if nothing is done, and the nightmare of 1,800 patients in the ICU. The best case scenario is now believed to be 1,000 in the ICU, more than double the second wave high. So the nightmare scenario, 1,800 patients in the province of Ontario in ICU. So what is Ontario, a province of 20,000 people or something like that? Is it? No, actually, it turns out that Ontario is rather more populous than that. It is a population of 14.8 million people. And apparently the prospect of 1,800 or perhaps even 1,000 people in intensive care units in a province with 14.8 million people is a catastrophe. Let's see, even that would probably require an immediate European-style lockdown, which Ontario has never attempted, a ruthless delineation of what is and is not essential work, paid sick days, which is the ideological Rubicon this government will not cross, travel restrictions between provinces, and within the province, in France and other jurisdictions where the variant overwhelmed them, people were allowed to travel only within 10 kilometers of their homes, and there was a 7 p.m. curfew. And how did that lockdown work out? It didn't. None of it is pretty. Aside from paid sick days and closing businesses, none of it could be easy. With every compromise, the catastrophe will widen further. How do catastrophes widen? And again, I'm looking for deaths here. I'm looking for deaths, and I'm not finding them. Arthur continues. So people are gasping and hungry for air and dying, and more every day. Could we have some numbers? Often younger, essential workers, racialized. Those are the best Ontarians, the racialized ones. And who racialized them, by the way? Vulnerable. The hospital system is already crumbling in places we can't see. There are COVID patients who would usually be in the ICU but are being cared for on the wards. One hospital executive in the GTA estimates they number in the hundreds. Does this doctor have a name? No, apparently he does not. No, it's mitigation now, Arthur concludes, and choices that will weigh disproportionately on the most vulnerable no matter what we do. This government has failed Ontario in the most unthinkable, unforgivable way. All those people gasping for air, all those doctors and nurses trying not to crumble, all the businesses shuttered and maybe gone while others were allowed to carry on. They belong to this government on a butcher's bill. I don't know what that means. And now this. At every phase, they didn't go far enough. At every stage, they waited. Bargaining with the virus is a hell of a way to lose. So now Ontario has reached the ugliest stage. After everything that could have been different, what do you do when it's too late? Well, I guess it doesn't matter then, does it, Bruce Arthur? The ugliest stage is journalists writing here's someone on a ventilator. Here's someone gasping for breath. And of course, ventilators were never used in the province of Ontario before COVID 19. So society must be destroyed. The economy must be destroyed because journalists are very upset. Journalists who are too stupid or ignorant to realize that these lockdowns haven't worked. They haven't worked. They haven't worked in France. They haven't worked anywhere. False positives. This is from The Guardian. Senior government officials have raised urgent concerns about the mass expansion of rapid coronavirus testing, estimating that as few as 2% to 10% of positive results may be accurate in places with low COVID rates, such as London. 2 to 10% accuracy. Well, I guess what we need is more testing then. Boris Johnson last week urged everyone in England to take 2 rapid turnaround tests a week in the biggest expansion of the multi-billion-pound testing program to date. However, leaked emails seen by The Guardian show that senior officials are now considering scaling back the widespread testing of people without symptoms due to a growing number of false positives. Ben Dyson, Executive Director of Strategy at the Health Department and one of Health Secretary Matt Hancock's advisors, stressed the fairly urgent need for decisions. On April the 9th, the day everyone in England was able to order twice-weekly lateral flow device tests, Dyson wrote, as of today, someone who gets a positive LFD result in, say, London, has at best a 25% chance of it being a true positive, but if it is a self-reported test, potentially low as 10% on an optimistic assumption about specificity, or as low as 2% on a more pessimistic assumption. Oh, yes. There's a video that is, before I get into the video, Richard Littlejohn writes in the Mail, some years ago, I went to a stand-up comedy night in Camden Lock in North London in aid of the charity Jewish Care. Biggest laugh of the evening greeted a routine by the multi-talented Bradley Walsh, then starting out on his road to stardom. It went something like, I'm thrilled to be taking part in a gig for Jewish Care. I've just got back from a week's holiday in Israel. Well, I say a week. Actually, I spent 48 hours in Eilat and 5 days answering questions at the airport. His knowing reference to the rigorous security precautions on the Israeli airline El Al brought the house down. And this was before the terrorist attacks on 9/11 turned air travel into a jobs-worth paradise. With Israel expected to open up to vaccinated British tourists next month, Bradley could update his shtick. I've just flown in from Tel Aviv, took me 12 hours, 5 on the plane, and another 7 queuing at Heathrow to get back into Britain. This time, however, I guarantee you that no one would find it remotely funny. The delays in the arrivals hall at Heathrow are way beyond a joke. Yes, I guess this is part of the new normal. I suppose that people should be grateful that they're allowed to travel anywhere for any reason, or even on occasion to leave their home. I came across this viral video of a one woman appearing 5 times, singing to the tune of a Queen song, "It's time to get vaccinated. Please don't decline. Get our shot and we can change. Concerts and sports events this summer could be so nice. So just get your vaccine. We're so close to our dream. Please end to this quarantine. We want our indoors. Shot, 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 shot. And drink wine." But of course. Oh, anti-vaxxers spreading. Oh, damn it. Why? And compliance. Compliance is essential. This video tells us. It's an obvious point that others have made before, but if these various vaccines are so very efficacious and so very safe, and apparently we were told they were going to end the lockdowns, the masks, and social distancing, then who wouldn't want to take them? Who wouldn't want to take them? There doesn't seem to be any answer to this from anyone that I have seen. Are people just that ornery? Oh, no, we can start rebuilding the world again and get back to normal if everyone takes a vaccine. And it is safe and efficacious, but I'm not going to do it. Just because people tell me I got to do something, I'm not. That's the kind of man I am. From lockdown skeptics, Royal College of Nursing comes out against mandatory vaccination for health and social care staff. Cost of COVID tests for holidaymakers still too high, says travel firm. Could it be that Boris Johnson doesn't want people leaving England or Britain for any reason? University students increasingly frustrated by having to pay full fees in spite of no face-to-face tuition for best part of a year. How long has this been going on for? I mean, the obvious answer is to shut down the universities. I mean, why are they needed? Oh, no, you're not going to go to classrooms and the libraries are all closed. So what is the purpose of the university now? It's a serious question. A university student should not be charged their full fees because of the level of disruption caused to learning by almost a year of heavy lockdown restrictions, according to a group of students who are calling for a day of action to highlight the matter. An online petition calling for tuition fees to be reduced has received almost 600,000 signatures. The group called Right Off Right Now is encouraging students across the country to take over social media today to spread the message about what they say is an unfair decision to charge full fees for those studying remotely during lockdown when in-person classes have been banned. Let's show vaccine passports for football games, the red card. But again, if people are going to be required to get vaccine passports, wouldn't this be the ID, the national ID that could be used in elections? I suspect that a bunch of Democratic politicians are going to say, yes, there must be vaccine passports, but no, they can't be integrated into election integrity. UK's daily COVID infections fall again by 12% in a week. And yes, but the restrictions must remain. And don't get too boisterous, says Boris Johnson. Behave responsibly. Let's go to Alex Berenson. Oh, yes. What do we have here? This is from The Atlantic. Whether the blood issues are ultimately linked to only one vaccine or two vaccines or more, it's absolutely crucial to remember. Oh, and again, the blood clot problem is multiplying. So are theories to explain it. Again, from The Atlantic. Berenson comments, hey, guess which elite media outlet is the first to admit that the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccines may not be alone in having a teeny problem with killing healthy adults. And he takes a poke at the Atlantic writer Derek Thompson, who wrote a hit piece on him a couple of weeks ago. Hint, Derek Thompson works there. Regarding that story yet, sweetie? Don't worry, you'll have lots of time. A new paper shows wearing two cloth or surgical masks is as useless as wearing one. Filtration was mostly in the 50 to 70% range in comparison, and 95s block 95 to 99% for a larger range of particles. Regular masks are like umbrellas that block half the rain. You'll still get soaked. Oh, here we go. Reading about Tony Fauci and AIDS is fascinating. By the early 1990s, the activist community had understandably convinced him that speeding treatments forward mattered more than dotting every I and crossing every T. As Larry Kramer said in 2006, he sensed we had enough mechanisms in place to allow certain things to go out faster. What it needed was a government official to make the first move, and that's what Tony Fauci did. And the playbook a 50-year-old Fauci used in 1991 is exactly the one he's following now as an octogenarian. The difference is that HIV is the most lethal virus in human history. Over 95% of the first 50,000 Americans who were infected died. COVID has a 99.8% plus survival rate. Well, I have to disagree with Berenson a little here. Fauci was perhaps America's biggest cheerleader for a drug called AZT, which killed every single person who didn't stop taking it. When AZT stopped being used, the number of AIDS deaths went like that. Let's go back to the chat. Is the J&J jab an mRNA vaccine? Says Octopus Knight. No, it is not. Fauci's history with PEPFAR is interesting. Thanks a lot, Larry Kramer. Larry Kramer was certainly one of the most wicked Americans of the 20th century. Just a monster of depravity. MF Superstar, movement to ban tuition until normalcy returns would be positively glorious. Dante's aunt said he was a good boy, Chogokin 666. Well, they're all good boys, aren't they? They didn't do nothing. Roulette Crack says paying £20,000 when you could have just watched YouTube videos instead. Utter scam. Lockdowns help breed the super killer too, says Cecil Henry. For real, Knut Witkowski said exactly that. Texas Feral Hog says we need to end this nonsense immediately. Well, yes, obviously we do, but where is the will to do so? We've been told that our elected representatives are powerless here. Even if we could convince them, it doesn't matter, because the latrine wallas have control of the situation and can do whatever they want. Well, lockdowns forever? Obviously not lockdowns forever, because society and will have ended and the economy will have totally collapsed. After how many years? It's already been a year, and things are pretty dire, especially in my country. Another year of this? I don't think there'd be a Canada, actually. Cecil Henry says, just realized we basically have Don Quixote managing public health decisions in Canada. Great Lakes Nationalist says, Deepak Chopra was one of the first beneficiaries of the boomers' reverence for the exotic. He monetized New Age spiritualism very cleverly. Again from Cecil Henry, KMG, did you see the young woman who phoned about 15 funeral homes in Ontario and asked if they had seen a change in funerals last year? There was no change anywhere. That's an actual journalist. No, I hadn't seen that, but thank you for that. Roulette Cracked says, this is their frustration that no one took their global warming doom mongering seriously. They had a bullseye with this nonsense and have a death grip on it now. Yes, this is my opinion. And it has been my opinion for quite some time. GC Stahl says Ontario death average 44 a day for province of 14.5 million. Enron says, I wonder if the Muggeridge firing line interviews are worth rewatching. Most of all, Buckley shows on YT are only good for laughs. Have you ever seen Joe Flaherty's impersonation of William F. Buckley Jr.? You can find it on YouTube, SCTV, Battle of the PBS Stars, which is perhaps the funniest thing that has ever been on television. Okay, so let's talk about Mick Jagger. Nobody lives forever, as I joked yesterday. David Mamet's joke, Sinatra gave it a shot. Tom Utley writes in the Daily Mail, by my standards, though I don't know about yours, Sir Mick Jagger has led a pretty interesting life. He has sold some $250 million records and counting, amassing a fortune reckoned in the hundreds of millions of pounds. He has appeared in numerous films, been painted by Andy Warhol, and has even had his bare bottom photographed by Cecil Beaton. He has met just about everyone in the world who is or was someone. These include the Queen and most of the royal family, Barack Obama, Margaret Thatcher, and of course, more or less every rock star who has ever made a hit record, from Chuck Berry to the Beatles. As for his experience of foreign lands, it would probably be quicker to list the countries he hasn't visited than to write down all those he has. Oh, and I almost forgot to add, in the course of his 77 years on this earth, including 6 decades in show business, he appears to have enjoyed a certain amount of success with the ladies. According to his biographers, he has bedded some 4,000 of the fairer sex, including such celebrated stunners as Marianne Faithfull, Jerry Hall, Sophie Dahl, and Carla Bruni, who went on to become the First Lady of France after marrying President Nicolas Sarkozy. He is even rumored to have had a close relationship with Princess Margaret. As his bandmate Charlie Watts observed after Jagger's appearance in the Queen's 2002 birthday honors list, Anybody else would be lynched. 18 wives and 20 children, and he's knighted. Fantastic. Utley says, in the interest of strict historical accuracy, I must point out that Jagger has in fact been married only once, to Bianca, and acknowledges paternity of just 8 children by a mere 5 different beauties. Well, Mick Jagger was supposedly married to Jerry Hall. And then, 20 years later or something like that, he said, well, it wasn't a real marriage because it was some sort of Hindu ceremony. Definitely the act of a cad. Then there are those millions of women who've never met him, yet still go weak at the knees at the thought of him. I regret to report that these include my own dear wife, who told me before our wedding in 1980, I'll never leave you for another man, apart from Mick Jagger, of course. Fortunately for me, I've managed to keep the pair of them apart these past 41 years. But I'm straying from my point, which is that if you or I had lived such a life as Sir Mick's, we might look back at it with some satisfaction. Not all of it, perhaps, since he has had his ups and downs like the rest of us. I'm thinking of his periodic fallings out with his fellow Rolling Stones and his criminal conviction in 1967 after one of the most famous drugs trials of the 20th century, though he ended up spending only one night in Brixton Prison before his 3-month sentence was commuted to a conditional discharge. But you could be forgiven for thinking that in Sir Mick's case, the downs were so much outweighed by the ups, the worldwide success and all its trappings, the adoring fans, the beautiful houses, the swooning supermodels, etc., and that most of his memories would give him pleasure. Not so, it seems. This week, the man of my wife's desires confided to Radio 6 music listeners that he found looking back on his life inordinately dull and upsetting, and that although he had been trying to write his memoirs during the lockdown, fans won't be seeing them anytime soon. It was way back in the early 1980s, apparently, when the publisher Lord Weidenfeld seduced him with the offer of a £1 million advance to write the story of his life. The money was the seductive part of it, said Sir Mick, but if you want to write an autobiography, it is not a process you can do in a week. It takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot of reliving emotions, reliving friendships, reliving ups and downs and all this. And I must say, it wasn't the most enjoyable experience, to be honest, reliving my life to the detriment of living in the now. It was inordinately dull and upsetting, and there weren't that many highs out of it. So I just said, I can't be bothered with this, and gave the money back to the publishers. Actually, I heard something a little different about that. I heard that he sent a manuscript to Weidenfeld and Nicholson, and they said, essentially, there's not enough smut in it. We need the gory details of all your sexual exploits with famous people. And Mick said, I'm not willing to do that. And Weidenfeld and Nicholson said, then we're not willing to publish this book. At the same time, Mick told him that he couldn't remember anything about his life, a problem familiar to many an aging rock star with a history of drug abuse. They do say, after all, that if you remember the 1960s, you weren't really there. But it wasn't really that, said Sir Mick. It was just that I didn't enjoy the process. All of which leads me, Utley writes, to the question, if Mick Jagger finds looking back on his packed and richly rewarded life inordinately dull, then where does that leave the rest of us? And yet, I can imagine, can't you, that after taking one's first 100 or so sexual partners to bed, one might begin to take a slightly jaded view of the act of love. Indeed, I rather pity conquest numbers 101 to 4,000. Where's the thrill of the chase, after all, for a man to whom women have surrendered themselves at the mere flash of that famous smile? Where's the blissful agony of wondering, will she, won't she, when Sir Mick has always known from the very outset that she almost certainly will? Yeah, I'm interested in that, because it's commonplace to mock men like Mick Jagger for their sexual excess. And I was thinking about this years ago with regard to some other fellow. And I thought, I have not had that person's advantages. I like to think that I, wouldn't act in a disgusting fashion, but I've never had the opportunity. So it would be otiose for me to engage in finger pointing. Utley concludes, I'm prepared to admit that my own life story, conventional middle-class education, steady job, one wife, 4 sons, 1 dog, and a penchant for vegging out in front of the TV would probably make a duller read than Mick Jagger's. But unlike the rock superstar, at least I can say that I'm able to relive my memories with almost unalloyed pleasure. I only hope that Mrs. Utley, who is shared in so many of them, will come to believe in opting for her Mr. Pooter. On balance, she made the better choice. And I'm going to go back to Hilaire Belloc and his book, The Servile State, published in 1912. Definitions. Man, like every other organism, can only live by the transformation of his environment to his own use. He must transform his environment from a condition where it is less to a condition where it is more subservient to his needs. That special conscious and intelligent transformation of his environment, which is peculiar to the peculiar intelligence and creative faculty of man, we call the production of wealth. Wealth is matter which has been consciously and intelligently transformed from a condition in which it is less to a condition in which it is more serviceable to a human need. Without wealth, man cannot exist. Yeah, tell that to the zero COVID crowd. The production of it is a necessity to him, and though it proceeds from the more to the less necessary, and even to those forms of production which we call luxuries, yet in any given human society, there is a certain kind and a certain amount of wealth without which human life cannot be lived. As for instance, in England today, certain forms of cooked and elaborately prepared food, clothing, warmth, and habitation. Therefore, to control the production of wealth is to control human life itself. To refuse man the opportunity for the production of wealth is to refuse him the opportunity for life. And in general, the way in which the production of wealth is by law permitted is the only way in which the citizens can legally exist. Wealth can only be produced by the application of human energy, mental and physical, to the forces of nature around us and to the material which those forces inform. This human energy, so applicable to the material world and its forces, we will call labor. As for that material and those natural forces, we will call them, for the sake of shortness, by the narrow but conventionally accepted term land. It would seem, therefore, that all problems connected with the production of wealth and all discussion thereupon involve but two principal original factors, to wit, labor and land. But it so happens that the conscious, artificial, intelligent action of man upon nature, corresponding to his peculiar character compared with other created beings, introduces a third factor of the utmost importance. Man proceeds to create wealth by ingenious methods of varying and often increasing complexity, and aids himself by the construction of implements. These soon become in each new department of the production as truly necessary to that production as labor and land. Further, any process of production takes a certain time. During that time, the producer must be fed and clothed and housed and the rest of it. There must therefore be an accumulation of wealth created in the past and reserved with the object of maintaining labor during its effort to produce for the future. Whether it be the making of an instrument or tool or the setting aside of a store of provisions, labor applied to land for either purpose is not producing wealth for immediate consumption. It is setting aside and reserving somewhat, and that somewhat is always necessary in varying proportions according to the simplicity or complexity of the economic society to the production of wealth. To such wealth reserved and set aside for the purposes of future production and not for immediate consumption, whether it be in the form of instruments and tools or in the form of stores for the maintenance of labor during the process of production, we give the name capital. Thus, there are three factors in the production of all human wealth, which we may conventionally term land, capital, and labor. When we talk of the means of production, we signify land and capital combined. Then we say that a man is dispossessed of the means of production or cannot produce wealth save by the leave of another who possesses the means of production. We mean that he is master only of his labor and has no control in any useful amount over either capital or land or both combined. A man politically free, that is, one who enjoys the right before the law to exercise his energies when he pleases, or not at all if he does not so please, but not possessed by legal right of control over any useful amount of the means of production, we call proletarian, and any considerable class composed of such men we call a proletariat. Property is a term used for that arrangement in society whereby the control of land and of wealth made from land, including therefore all the means of production, is vested in some person or corporation. Thus we may say of a building, including the land upon which it stands, that it is the property of such and such a citizen or family or college, or of the state, meaning that those who own such property are guaranteed by the laws in the right to use it or withhold it from use. Private property signifies such wealth, including the means of production, as may, by the arrangements of society, be in control of persons or corporations other than the political bodies of which these persons or corporations are in another aspect members. What distinguishes private property is not that the possessor thereof is less than the state or is only part of the state, for were that so, we should talk of municipal property as private property, but rather that the owner may exercise his control over it to his own advantage, and not as a trustee for society, nor in the hierarchy of political institutions. Thus, Mr. Jones is a citizen of Manchester, but he does not own his private property as a citizen of Manchester. He owns it as Mr. Jones. Whereas, if the house next to his own be owned by the Manchester municipality, they own it only because they are a political body standing for the whole community of the town. Mr. Jones might move to Glasgow and still own his property in Manchester, but the municipality of Manchester can only own its property in connection with the corporate political life of the town. An ideal society in which the means of production should be in the hands of the political officers of the community we call collectivist, or more generally socialist. A society in which private property and land and capital, that is the ownership and therefore control of the means of production, is confined to some number of free citizens not large enough to determine the social mass of the state, while the rest have not such property and are therefore proletarian, we call capitalist. And the method by which wealth is produced in such a society can only be the application of labor, the determining mass of which must necessarily be proletarian to land and capital, in such a fashion that of the total wealth produced, the proletariat which labors shall only receive a portion. These two marks then defining the capitalist state are: one, that the citizens thereof are politically free, i.e. can use or withhold at will their possessions or their labor, but are also, two, divided into capitalist and proletarian in such proportions that the state as a whole is not characterized by the institution of ownership among free citizens, but by the restriction of ownership to a section markedly less than the whole, or even to a small minority. Such a capitalist state is essentially divided into two classes of free citizens, the one capitalist or owning, the other propertyless or proletarian. My last definition concerns the servile state itself, and since the idea is both somewhat novel and also the subject of this book, I will not only establish but expand its definition. The definition of the servile state is as follows: that arrangement of society in which so considerable a number of the families and individuals are constrained by positive law to labor for the advantage of other families and individuals as to stamp the whole community with the mark of such labor, we call the servile state. Note first certain negative limitations in the above which must be clearly seized if we are not to lose clear thinking in a fog of metaphor and rhetoric. That society is not servile, in which men are intelligently constrained to labor by enthusiasm, by a religious tenet, or indirectly from fear of destitution, or directly from love of gain, or from the common sense which teaches them that by their labor they may increase their well-being. And I will return to Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State on Monday. I want to talk about failed or failing states now. Ukraine is certainly a failed or failing state, but there are others, including my own country of Canada, and perhaps even the most powerful nation on earth, the United States of America. Jim Kunstler writes today, Joe Biden's party must be thinking, if you call it thinking, that being psychotic isn't enough. It's time to go demonic. How else to explain the supernatural doings of the folks in charge of things in our nation's capital? The casual observer might suppose that these things are spinning out of control, but you also have to wonder how much Joe Biden and company are spinning them that way. Are they looking to start a war, for instance? 3 weeks ago, old white Joe called Vladimir Putin a killer. This week, old Joe called Vlad on the phone and suggested a friendly in-person meetup in some third country. In the meantime, Old Joe essayed to send a couple of U.S. warships into the Black Sea to assert America's interest in Ukraine, the failed state whose American-sponsored failure was engineered in 2014 by Barack Obama's State Department. Turkey, which controls the narrow entrance to the Black Sea, was notified that 2 U.S. destroyers would be steaming through its territory. Hours after the announcement, the U.S. called off the ships. Then, hours after Old Joe proffered at that summit meeting, his State Department imposed new economic sanctions on Russia and tossed out a dozen or so Russian embassy staff. How's that for a coherent foreign policy? What's going on in Ukraine anyway? The U.S. and NATO have prompted Ukraine to move troops and tanks toward the ethnically Russian breakaway Donbass region. Russia countered by massing 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border. Though supplied with Western armaments, Ukraine's ragtag and incompetent army has no ability to control the Donbass, nor do either NATO and the U.S. have any real will to interfere there with their own troops. The logistics are insane. Putin's elegant solution, evacuate the 3 million plus Russians stuck in Donbass into Russia, which needs labor, ceding the empty territory to foundering Ukraine, soon to be an ungovernable post-industrial frontier between East and West. For a rich rundown on these matters, read Dmitry Orlov's mordant disquisition on the subject. The lesson there is that the U.S. has absolutely nothing to gain from continuing to antagonize Russia, and that the mentally weak Joe Biden is merely projecting the picture of a weakened and confused USA by keeping it up. Of course, a closer read might be that these hijinks are meant to distract from the more serious and consequential breakdown in relations between the U.S. and China, currently engineered by the blundering team of Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who went to Alaska recently to tell the Chinese delegation that they were morally unworthy of conducting trade negotiations, thereby torpedoing the trade negotiations that they went to Alaska to conduct. Smooth move, fellas. On the domestic front, Joe Biden's government only seeks to turn American life inside out and upside down, with the move to make the politics-neutral District of Columbia into a state, strictly to furnish 2 more senators for the DNC, and to pack the Supreme Court strictly to advantage the same DNC. Those bills are being rushed through the House committees, but something tells me they will die in the Senate. One must also wonder what exactly the rush is all about. I'll tell you. Jim Kunstler predicts something is up in the shadows. Something is lurking out there that is going to bring down old Joe Biden as an illegitimate chief executive. Could be some new non-ignorable evidence of his China grifting activities, or new non-ignorable evidence about, well, I'll just say the November election. Could be something else. Contrary to just about everybody I communicate with, I remain convinced that former U.S. Attorney for Connecticut, now Special Prosecutor John Durham, is still putting real cases together, and I suspect that his cases exceed the narrow spotlight of the origin of the Steele dossier. And I expect that indictments will be announced soon in a way that will shock the nation. Just saying, though nobody else is. Meanwhile, the wokester branch of Joe Biden's party makes hay with the ambiguous killings of 2 more criminal suspects of color. First, Daunte Wright of Minneapolis, busy ignoring the open warrant out for him in failing to answer a previous warrant for his role in the 2019 aggravated burglary, that is, with a firearm of a woman. He was out on $100,000 bail, but it was revoked in July 2020 when he got caught in possession of another gun. In the commotion of his resisting arrest, he got shot, tragically for Officer Kim Potter, who somehow mistook her handgun for a taser. She is now teed up on a manslaughter case, while the Wright family is teed up for a multi-million-dollar personal injury lawsuit settlement, courtesy of ambulance chaser Ben Crump. The city of Minneapolis is being teed up for a municipal auto da fe of looting, burning, and rioting in the name of justice, and the Derek Chauvin trial has not even concluded. Secondarily, out comes the chest cam video of Chicago police officer Eric Stillman shooting 13-year-old junior gang banger Adam Toledo in possession of a handgun in a 3 a.m. chase down a West Side alleyway. So Officer Stillman is teed up for some career-ending action, and Chicago is teed up for another round of looting, burning, and rioting, sure to spread to other cities all over the country as the woke vengeance campaign moves into its satanic phase. Let's go to the chat. Roulette Cracked says, divided we fall, no better time than now to test the mettle of these fake Western leaders. Well, Casso88 says, more wishful thinking from Kunstler. It could be true, but I too was struck by what seems close to panic in the Biden administration. Everything must be done now, right now, and I mean everything. Everything you thought was America is over now. And this has to be done without any thought, without any discussion, without consulting the nation. We have to do it now. Well, again, why the rush? My trail of disgrace says, since lockdowns, masks, and vaccines seem to be limited in usefulness, why not instead open everything up and spend money on things that actually help? More ICUs if required, treatment packs as in India. Most overrated movie of the 80s is Gandhi, says Palpcasso 88. Oscar bait. Yeah, I'm not too keen on Oscar bait movies. Okay. Oh, 5 Easy Pieces. That is a very bitter, depressing movie. Jack Nicholson's character, I wrote about this for the American Conservative some years ago. Jack Nicholson's character is a man without any redeeming qualities whatsoever. What's the most overrated movie of the 1970s? Did Ordinary People come out in the 1970s? I saw Apocalypse Now when it came out, and there are good things in it, but it's just incoherent. It's just a mess. It's a disaster. Okay. So the story is, from Conrad, that the jungle, the primitive, drives a man insane. Instead, we get Martin Sheen, filmed cinema verite, liquored up and highly emotional, destroying a mirror with his bare hands and feet. He has already lost it even before he starts going down the river. Okay. What are we going to talk about next? Oh, just an article by this is from Dmitry Orlov, which appears on the Saker. And the Ukraine, people know very much about the Ukraine. Orlov talks about the neo-Nazis in the Ukraine. If these Ukro-Nazi zealots that stand directly in the way of any peaceful settlement of the situation in eastern Ukraine and inevitable eventual rapprochement between the Ukrainians and Russia, there is a deep and abiding irony in that these uber anti-Semitic Ukro-Nazis are about to be ordered into battle against Russia by a Jewish comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, president, who got elected thanks to a Jewish oligarch, Igor Benny Kolomoisky. Are they going to be annihilated? Quite possibly, yes. Will their annihilation make Ukraine and the world a better place? You be the judge. To the Russians, these Nazi battalions are just a bunch of terrorists, and as Putin famously put it, it is up to him to send terrorists to God, and then it is up to God to decide what to do with them. But there is a more efficient strategy. Let them remain somebody else's problem. After all, these Nazi battalions have almost zero ability to threaten Russia. Eventually, the Europeans will realize that the Ukraine must be denazified at their own expense, of course, with Russia offering advice and moral support. I've been talking about this for years, and few people seem to be interested that the new Ukraine, that Victoria Nuland begat, is a coalition between Jewish oligarchs and neo-Nazis. And why are the neo-Nazis there? Because the Ukrainian people do not want to fight for their corrupt regime. This makes sense to me. How is it possible that a country such as the Ukraine, with its wealth of agricultural land and minerals, has a per capita annual income half of that of Belarus? How is that even possible? Well, I think we know. Corruption. Everything that isn't nailed down is stolen in the Ukraine. Oh, COVID-19 outbreak hits Canadian soldiers deployed in Ukraine. Why are Canadian soldiers in the Ukraine? According to my old colleague, Stephen Chase, Canadian troops are dispersed among 12 locations in Ukraine, a factor that has helped stop the spread. About 200 soldiers are deployed to Ukraine as part of Operation Unifier. Yeah, okay. You know, I think that there's some people, even in the Liberal Party, who want Justin Trudeau gone as Liberal leader. You know, was it Hilaire Belloc said? You know, keep a hold of nurse for fear of finding something worse. The likely replacement as Liberal leader and Prime Minister would be Chrystia Freeland, who would be quite prepared to incite a war, a nuclear war, with Russia in order to avenge the memory of her Nazi collaborator grandfather. So no, better Justin Trudeau than Chrystia Freeland. From NBC News, in secret Facebook groups, America's best warriors share racist jabs, lies about 2020, even QAnon theories. NBC News reviewed posts from 4 private secret Facebook groups that describe themselves as solely for current and former special operations officers. And of course, privacy means nothing to Carroll E. Lee, the author of this piece, and NBC News. I think in fairness, Carroll E. Lee must be compelled to turn over all of her private communications to a hostile organization for analysis. Among the hundreds of Facebook posts NBC News reviewed from forums for current and former Rangers, Green Berets, and other elite warriors, a member of a special forces group lamenting that several aides to former Vice President Mike Pence were part of a concerted effort by the thieves and pedophiles walking the hallowed halls of the people's government to undermine former President Donald Trump. In a just world, they would have already been taken out behind the courthouse and shot. Okay. And apparently some of these special forces, former special forces, elite soldiers, they're not too keen on the Secretary of Defense. One of them called him Bubba. Oh, can you imagine? And some of them said that he had ridden his race to the top. Apparently, members of the special forces, present and previous, are not allowed to have private opinions or to have opinions privately expressed. U.S. Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, published a plan last month to try to improve racial and ethnic diversity and remove bias within an arm of the military that is overwhelmingly white and male. Boo! As national and global demographics shift and become more diverse, so must our enterprise. There is absolutely no evidence of that, and I'll be speaking about that in the book club. The Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Plan states, a recent attempt by SOCOM's recent moves to address diversity created a hiccup. SOCOM reassigned the organization's new chief of diversity and inclusion because of his social media posts, including a derogatory one that essentially compared Trump to Adolf Hitler. Yeah, that's definitely the sort of person that you want to be in charge of special operations. Oh, and Heidi Beirich shows up in this story because, of course, she does. I suppose she is America's most prominent race grifter. Well, white one, anyway. And Facebook is, they're the decider. It's the decider. They decide no less than truth and lies. Facebook censors DailyMail.com story on BLM co-founder's multi-million-dollar LA property empire. Users that wanted to share links to the DailyMail.com were met with a message that it couldn't be shared. However, other outlets such as Black Enterprise, a media company that covers Black-owned businesses, was allowed to be shared by Facebook users. And who else? Who else got hit by this? Why, the New York Post. This is from Rachel Bovard. Just months after Facebook retaliated against the government of Australia by effectively canceling the flow of that country's information, the company is at it again, this time wielding its outsized power to shield progressive political figures from public criticism. Yesterday, Facebook's nearly 3 billion users worldwide discovered they could not share a New York Post story about a Black Lives Matter co-founder, Patrice Khan-Cullors, a self-identified Marxist purchasing several high-end homes. The story was blocked from circulation on all of Facebook's social media services, the platform itself, Instagram, as well as Facebook Messenger. When pressed for its reasoning, Facebook declared that the story violated their community standards by providing personal or confidential information or images in violation of their privacy rights. Odd, because according to the Post, all of the information in its reporting, including the photos, was gathered from public sources. No addresses were shared. By now, the hypocrisy of Facebook and big tech more generally is well-worn territory. These are the same platforms who made up reasons to block circulation of a separate New York Post story about influence peddling in the Biden family weeks before the 2020 election. Yes, what is to be done? What is to be done? I think if our society is to survive in any livable manner, war must be declared on big tech and on big corporations. In general, they're not going to get any better. Let's put it that way. They're not going to wake up and decide, yeah, I don't know, maybe free speech, free inquiry is a good thing. No, they are not. Canada, a failed state. BC's dire overdose anniversary marks 7,000 dead in 5 years. This is from Rochelle Baker at the Toronto Star, Vancouver edition. More than 7,000 people have died from toxic drugs in the half-decade since authorities declared overdose deaths a public health crisis in 2016. Yet more than 5 people continue to die on a daily basis in BC, and the numbers inflamed by the pandemic are rising, not falling. Bound by love and loss, mothers of the dead gathered outside the legislature in Victoria Wednesday to demand government decriminalize the personal possession of drugs and provide people who use them better access to a safe supply. The same day, activists with the Drug User Liberation Front gathered in Vancouver's downtown east side to hand out safe, tested heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine to people who need them but can't access through the medical system. Yeah, okay. So people are dying in record numbers of overdoses of illegal drugs. What we must do, obviously, is give them more drugs. It's a major scandal that the media in my country has neglected to paying attention to, that Prime Minister Trudeau said some months ago that no, we are not going to make drugs legal, all of them. Marijuana is already legal. However, we are giving high-quality drugs to drug addicts. Well, you know, culling the weak. Canada is now actively engaged in culling the weak, the young, and the old. Saves money in the long run. From the Star, for one day, BC activists handed out clean heroin and cocaine. This is supposed to be illegal. Did the police have anything to say about this? No, the police does not appear in that story. And the NDP, an NDP MP, health critic Don Davies, is calling on Canada to decriminalize the simple possession of illicit substances and expand federal support for safe supply and harm reduction efforts to save lives amid the country's worsening drug poisoning crisis. Well, it was about 15 years ago or so that harm reduction was embraced by the cities of Vancouver and Victoria, and they took the attitude, junkies, what do you want? What can we do for you junkies? And what was the result of this harm reduction? The number of people dying of overdoses exploded. And there are hypodermic needles all over the streets, and there's little containers to dump your used hypodermic needles, which are all over the streets of Vancouver and Victoria. People shooting up in public. Tremendous increase in the number of the deranged staggering about the streets, threatening people. And as far as failed state, Canada, this is from Douglas Kwan again from the Star. Facing the possibility of additional jail time, a BC father who repeatedly flouted court orders in order to wage a public campaign against his transgender child's gender-affirming treatment told a judge Wednesday that he may have got caught up in the publicity and put his trust in people with ulterior motives. The court also heard this week from the teenager who said in a statement his father's defiance of publication bans left him feeling anxious and terrified he would be outed. Over and over, private stuff about me was published online because of my dad. I've lost my faith that the courts can protect me. That makes me feel really vulnerable, he wrote in a victim impact statement. The father, who cannot be identified due to a publication ban, pleaded guilty Tuesday to criminal contempt of court, avoiding a trial. The Crown recommended a sentence of 45 days in jail plus 18 months probation credit for the time he has already served. But BC Supreme Court Justice Michael Tamman said Wednesday he was leaning toward a heftier sentence based on the father's conduct. I would tell you, I am very much thinking of imposing a further term of imprisonment beyond time served. The sentence of 45 days is woefully inadequate and would tend to bring the administration of justice into dispute. Okay. So a 12-year-old girl decides that she's a boy. And the school, okay, you're a boy. We're going to call you a boy now. We're going to treat you like a boy. And this is all kept secret, from the father. And then he finds out about it. And, he's ordered to refer to what was his daughter as a son. And he says no. And he says that the puberty blockers and all the rest of it, it's tremendously harmful. And I'm not going along with it. And the courts of British Columbia have decided to make an example of him. That progressivism now means, among other things, the sexual mutilation of children, which must not only be tolerated, it must be affirmed, it must be extolled, and anyone who disagrees must be crushed. Yes. For Peregrine Worsthorne once said, for a country to be loved, it must be lovable, and my country is no longer lovable. Increasingly, it is the opposite. Apparently, medical experts said, yes, of course, this 12-year-old is, this 12-year-old's never going to change its mind. So, yeah, let's go ahead with the sexual mutilation of a 12-year-old because medical experts say it's a good idea. Yeah, well, medical experts used to believe that cutting out a large part of the brain would be a useful treatment and employed that for some decades. Medical experts also believed that homosexuality could be treated with electric shocks or insulin shock. Yes, medical experts. They never do anything horrifying. Let's go to the chat. Press 1 if you're a Georgist, says Chogokin666. A reference to Henry George, I suppose. Just saw a wild 1970 movie called Joe, says MF Superstar. Yes, that was Peter Boyle. And it was supposed to be a movie in favor of the hippies. But this redneck, Joe, America embraced him, this violent redneck, to its bosom. Roulette Crack said David Bowie kept changing his identity. Imagine if he was stuck in his original 12-year-old form, we would never have met Ziggy Stardust. I hear Trepanation is coming back in style, says Dan. Okay. Slapshot. I talked about that on Theater Thursday, a couple of years ago? It's absolutely hilarious movie. Very, very profane. And there's a scene in it where the subject of homosexuality comes up, male homosexuality comes up. This movie is going to be canceled because what Paul Newman says to the mother of this boy is shocking, just too shocking, too shocking. There's no way that this degree of madness is sustainable, says Contracoup. Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right. The question is, though, how much that we know will be destroyed before sanity returns. Joekin666 says, love to see KMG review the Richard III remake with Ian McKellen. GC Style says, with drugs supplied to addicts, I wonder if we can get the government to supplement my beer supply. That is not as ridiculous as it might seem. Or how about tobacco? How about cigarettes? I'm constantly being asked for cigarettes when I step out of my hotel. There's a lot of people there on the street who apparently desperately need tobacco but don't have the money to afford it. And I see these people, they're picking up butts on the street, butts that have been thrown away, butts that have been trodden on even, and butts contaminated with various substances and smoking them. That can't be good for their health. Why shouldn't these people be given free cigarettes? Roulette Cracked said OxyContin was safe. Its safety did not help the addicts. Well, you know, I see this as part of urban pacification. Let's just get everybody on drugs. Or let's get everyone in identity politics, the trans movement. And so there will be no hope of political change because everyone is just me. Palpcastle 88 reminds us that I will be discussing the movie Parasite next week. Texas Feral Hog says Blade Runner hasn't aged well. Yeah, I think that movie, I think it's a failure, actually, for various reasons. Yes, and Run, Friends of Eddie Coyle. Okay, there we go. We'll talk about, I'll add that. That will be the movie that I add tonight. Okay. And let's talk about today's book, which is published by Encounter Books. And it is called The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, How Political Correctness Captured Big Business. It is written by Stephen R. Sukup, described as the senior commentator, vice president, and publisher of the Political Forum, an independent research provider that delivers research and consulting services to the institutional investment community with an emphasis on economic, social, political, and geopolitical events likely to have an impact on the financial markets in the United States and abroad. He has followed politics and federal regulatory policy for the financial community since 1996, when he joined the award-winning Washington Research Office of Prudential Securities. I'll read the description of the book here from the publisher. For the better part of a century, the left has been waging a slow, methodical battle for control of the institutions of Western civilization. During most of that time, business, and American big business in particular, remained the last redoubt for those who believed in free people, free markets, and the criticality of private property. Over the past 2 decades, however, that has changed, and the left has taken its long march to the last remaining non-leftist institution. Over the course of the last 2 years or so, a small handful of politicians on the right, Senators Tom Cotton, Marco Rubio, and Josh Hawley, to name 3, have begun to sense that something is wrong with American business and have sought to identify the problem and offer solutions to rectify it. While the attention of high-profile politicians to the issue is welcome, to date the solutions they have proposed are inadequate for a variety of reasons, including a failure to grasp the scope of the problem, failure to understand the mechanisms of corporate governance, and an over-reliance on state-imposed top-down solutions. In this book, I will provide a comprehensive overview of the problem and the players involved, both on the aggressive, hard-charging left and in the nascent conservative resistance. I will explain what the left is doing and how and why the right must be prepared and willing to fight back to save this critical aspect of American culture from becoming another more economically powerful version of the woke college campus. Well, yes, the use of that term, the right, is problematic, as the kiddies like to say in this circumstance, because prominent conservative figures like David A. French, here's the book, by the way, take a look at that, like David A. French say big business should be able to do whatever the hell it wants to. If big business decides that there isn't going to be free speech in America, well, it's private business, so they can do whatever they like. I will start my discussion of this book by going to the end. He talks about the German legal philosopher Carl Schmitt and his ideas, his opposition to the rise of the total state. And he equates this to what is happening with business. One needn't be a German legal theorist to see that this concept of total war in the total state applies beyond the realm of actual literal war and can be applied to just about any conflict in the total state. The political is omnipresent. It dominates every aspect of our lives, just as Schmidt observed and predicted, and it therefore ensures that any disagreement becomes an occasion for total war and the division of all people into combatant groups, friends, or enemies. Part 1 of this book detailed how the total state came to dominate every aspect of modern life save one, business and capital markets. It traced the history of the ideas that produced the total politicized state and the application of those ideas to create a total political societal ethos. Part 2 identified the combatants, the friends and enemies, and the techniques utilized in the last battle in this war, the battle to dominate this final sphere of human enterprise and to make it part of the political and a part of the total state as well. The values over which this war is being waged are not only clear and indisputable, but are also the defining values of our civilization. And at the risk of being overdramatic, the fate of a civilization may well rest on the outcome of this particular battle, which is precisely why those who would make business and markets part of the political are fighting it so totally, so remorselessly. There is a profound irony here and a profound warning. Carl Schmitt understood that this value development and self-identification would create political disorder. He also explained how order might be restored in such a society where multiple friend-enemy factions had developed. Schmitt was a living, breathing oxymoron. He grew frustrated with and tired of trying to rationalize the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of the Weimar Republic, and so he chose to pledge his allegiance to those who would restore order, and he became the crown juror of the Third Reich. By pledging his fidelity to the Nazis, Schmitt both fulfilled his pre-Nazi philosophical theories and at the same time sacrificed his personal credibility. He became a significant part of the problem he identified and professed to find intolerable. Disorder is uncomfortable, it is messy, it is not always efficient, but it is from disorder that creative destruction springs. The urge to bring order to disorder, to impose constancy on variability, to consolidate values is not just the means by which liberty is killed, it is also the means by which Schumpeter's Gale is killed. The choice here is simple. If we as a civilization allow even the spirit of capitalism to become part of the political and part of the total state, then we will have order for however long that lasts. If we resist the politicization of business and of capital markets, however, if we determine for ourselves that disorder and depoliticization are the preferable options, then we not only preserve liberty, but also preserve the spirit of innovation and expression that harnesses liberty to create wealth and prosperity. It does not matter in the grand scheme if the values advocated for homogenization of business and markets are reasonable sounding and bear reassuring names like pragmatism or neo-pragmatism. All that matters is that this attempt to shift the normative discussion away from the shared morals of our civilization and to the values of friend-enemy dichotomy will ultimately destroy everything in the process. Now, Sukup begins this book, which came out this year, by talking about the state of Georgia and that woke capital had decided that Georgia needed to be punished. What for this time? Oh, they passed an abortion law that woke capital didn't like. And Sukup in his book points out that these companies, including Disney, seem to have no problem operating in the country of France, where abortions beyond 12 weeks are banned. He begins on March 24th, 2020, the U.S. government, which Lincoln famously called the last best hope of Earth, officially launched a partnership with BlackRock, Inc., the world's largest money management firm. With the economy suddenly in shambles, crushed under the weight of the global coronavirus pandemic and associated social distancing measures, the Federal Reserve desperately needed help navigating uncharted territory and administering and managing its brand new corporate bond programs. And in its hour of need, the Jerome Powell-led Fed turned to Larry Fink and BlackRock. It was an interesting, if unsurprising, choice for the Fed. With more than $7 trillion in assets at the time, BlackRock was already the undisputed king of the financial services world. More to the point, over the several previous months, it had also become one of the world's largest and most powerful advocates of what Fink called a fundamental reshaping of finance. If anyone could help the Fed and help the nation, then it would seem that Larry Fink was the man. The interesting thing is that Fink made his declaration on reshaping finance several weeks before he was tapped by the Fed and before he met with President Donald Trump, who later called him one of the smartest people we, the nation, have working to fix all our problems. Even before coronavirus cratered the stock market and the American economy, Fink was already busy finding ways to fix that which he saw as broken, which included a great deal more than the fallout from a mere virus. Fink planned to reshape finance, not just to save the country, but to save the world as well. You see, Larry Fink is a born-again fundamentalist. He's not a fundamentalist in the sense that market observers and participants might expect, i.e. someone with a deep and abiding dedication to market fundamentals or company fundamentals. Rather, Larry Fink is a religious fanatic, a believer in the search of the pure, fundamental practice of his faith. Or, at the very least, by the start of 2020, he had decided to play one on TV. Fink had been building to a public profession of his faith for several years, and in late January, even as COVID-19 was already ravaging Wuhan, China, he made it official in a letter to clients of his firm and a concurrent letter to CEOs. We believe, Fink professed, that sustainability should be our new standard for investing. In doing so, Fink not only expressed his own belief in the importance of sustainability, but he also assuaged what he said were customers who had told him they were extremely worried about climate change. These customers had told him apparently that they worried not merely about the physical risk associated with rising global temperatures, but about how the global transition to a low-carbon economy could affect a company's long-term profitability as well. He heard their cries and responded as a fellow believer. Conveniently enough, by embracing sustainability as the value by which investments should be measured, Fink also aligned himself with the best and the brightest in the worlds of economics and finance. The great global institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the self-identified guardians of the post-war global order. He aligned himself with the Federal Reserve, which had already begun investigating the process by which it could factor climate change into its lending practices. Perhaps notably, he aligned himself specifically with the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, who 12 years earlier had founded the Global Environment Fund, a private equity firm focused on sustainable energy and investments. Yes, as they say, doing well by doing good. In short, Fink aligned himself with and placed himself at the forefront of the ESG movement, an investment trend focused on environmental, social, and governance matters in assessing a company's long-term value. He placed himself in the position to be crowned king, not just of the financial services world, but also of woke capital, the top-down anti-democratic means by which some of the most powerful and best-known men and women in American business are endeavoring to change capitalism, the securities markets, and the fundamental relationship between the state and its citizens, and to save the world. When the histories of this era are written, 2019 will go down as the year of ESG, the year of planning for investment instability that, as it turns out, did nothing to limit investment instability. American investors alone plowed more than $20 billion into ESG funds in 2019, more than 4 times what they had invested in ESG the year before. ESG became the hottest, fastest growing, and most conscience-allaying trend in the investment business. Larry Fink told clients that by the end of 2020, all active portfolios and advisory strategies will be fully ESG integrated. And then he took over the Fed's portfolios on behalf of the American people. ESG investments promise solutions to issues that otherwise seem intractable. Thus, they have become an attractive alternative to at least 2 types of investors. The first of these is the investor who very much wants to make gobs and gobs of money, but doesn't want to seem crass and greedy. He wants to be seen as socially responsible, even as he earns an 8 or 9-figure salary and amasses a net worth in the billions. A kinder, gentler Gordon Gekko for the 21st century. Think here of Jamie Dimon, the CEO of BlackRock's competitor, JP Morgan Chase. Dimon wants the Lord to make him chaste, but not yet. He mouths the words of the creed, but doesn't quite believe them. To him, ESG is the means to an end, and that end is Jamie Dimon and his friends getting filthy rich. And I should point out, as Matt Taibbi has written about extensively, JP Morgan Chase violates the law of the United States of America insouciantly. And it gets fined billions and billions and billions of dollars. But for him and for JP Morgan Chase, it is just a cost of business. So how did we get here? We got here because of a change in the nature of administration. And like many bad things, this idea comes from Germany, as does cultural Marxism, that scientists, experts were going to be in charge of public administration. Now, of course, the difficulty, and Woodrow Wilson was really essential to this. The difficulty here is that there's an assumption, there's a planted axiom, as James Burnham would say, that these experts, that these administrators can never be truly disinterested, that they do not have axes to grind of their own. Later, this was rather flipped on its head, and it became the prevailing belief amongst students of the bureaucracy that the bureaucracy must be progressive, that it must take a stand. The Federal Reserve, well, J.P. Morgan himself was very keen on the creation of a Federal Reserve, which is not exactly the National Bank of the United States because it is owned by the banks. It works for the banks. This is what the Federal Reserve does. The Federal Reserve exercises enormous power over economics, the economies of the United States and the world, but it is essentially a puppet of private bankers, which is quite an extraordinary situation. But of course, we all take it for granted now. He then goes on to write about the long march through the institutions and Antonio Gramsci. So you see, Marxist intellectuals, they looked at what had happened in this creation of the Soviet Union, and they were puzzled by this. They were perplexed because the Soviet Union, or what became the Soviet Union, or let's just say Russia, was the last place that there should be a communist revolution because it was an overwhelmingly agrarian economy and not industrial. And right from the very beginning, various skeptics about Marxism, clever people on the left were about, let's see, Gramsci concluded more or less that it's awfully tough to start a new religion where an existing religion is already firmly entrenched. He didn't put it that way, of course. He said that Marx was wrong in his presumption that all of man's history is the story of economic class conflict. Rather, Gramsci argued that the real class conflicts are cultural, which in turn led to a theory of cultural revolution. The battle for the soul of mankind must be waged on cultural grounds first, and only after the existing culture has been thoroughly destroyed can the new culture and the new economics be established. Like Marx, Gramsci saw Christianity as an enemy, although for Gramsci, the religion's influence was much more pervasive and much more corrosive. Christianity, you see, was not just a faith, but a cultural force, the creator and enabler of the bourgeois culture that kept the classes living relatively peacefully and harmoniously with one another. Therefore, in order to bring about the revolution and liberate the workers of the world from their chains, both the Christian church and Christian culture had to be destroyed. As the enigmatic and controversial priest-turned writer Malachi Martin put it in his analysis of Gramsci and his ideas, quote, there would be no Marxist-inspired violent overthrow of the ruling superstructure by the working underclasses, because no matter how oppressed they might be, the structure of the working classes was defined not by their misery or their oppression, but by their Christian faith and their Christian culture, unquote. In light of all this, Gramsci believed that the proletarian revolution must be preceded by a cultural revolution, one in which the anti-Christian Marxist made what the German Marxist student leader Rudi Dutschke would later call the long march through the institutions. He goes on to discuss the importance of György Lukács, of course, who was a minister in the demented communist government in Hungary of Bela Kun. Yes, special lectures were organized in schools and literature printed and distributed to instruct children about free love, about the nature of sexual intercourse, about the archaic nature of bourgeois family codes, about the outdatedness of monogamy, and the irrelevance of religion, which deprives man of all pleasure. Children urged thus to reject and deride paternal authority and the authority of the church, and to ignore precepts of morality easily and spontaneously turned into delinquents with whom only the police could cope. This call to rebellion addressed to children was matched by a call to rebellion addressed to Hungarian women. Yes, it's interesting to consider that what I've just read to you came from perhaps the craziest communist government that's ever existed on Earth. 100 years later, it is settled doctrine that all of those things are true. That children, beginning from kindergarten or even before, must be instructed in the joys of trans, homosexuality, etc., that they belong to themselves and not to their parents, or certainly not to God. I suppose you can say that communism was a failure, but what type of communism are we talking about? Because if you talk about Western or cultural Marxism, what we have seen there is almost a total victory by the communists. Sukop writes, the Lukács Frankfurt School's social reinterpretation of Marxism is important, not just in an academic sense, but in a much broader, much more practical sense as well, which is precisely how they wanted it. Horkheimer's interpretation of the state of Marxism was more pessimistic than even Lukács's or Gramsci's. He saw the situation in Europe in the direst of terms. There would never be any revolution if he and his colleagues did not first figure out how to undo the cultural and psychological bourgeois hegemony. And of course, the Frankfurt School reached out to Freud. And I should point out that Thomas Szasz points out in one of his books that Freud himself actually declared that he had invented psychoanalysis to destroy Christianity in revenge for what he said were various insults meted out to his father. So the cultural Marxists take over the universities. They take over the elite to a very large extent, and they take over this based on their academic theory, which says that people do not know what is best for them, and that managers, experts, must be in charge. So we see he talks about how the nature of shareholders and so-called stakeholders has changed, and he talks about here. Let me just look this up here. Richard Rorty. Yes. It's important that he writes about pragmatism. It's important to note here that the pragmatism involved in the broader stakeholder enterprise is not the pragmatism of what might be called common sense. This is not pragmatism in the colloquial sense of the word. Remember, Edward Freeman is a philosopher by training, and his pragmatism is therefore a philosophical pragmatism, an approach to business strategy in the stakeholder genre that harnesses the ethical formations of John Dewey, John Rawls, and Richard Rorty. Of the three, Dewey is likely the most important, Rawls the best known, and Rorty the most controversial and most pernicious. For the purposes of this examination of the effects of this neo-pragmatism on stakeholder theory, and then by extension on the politicization of capital markets, it might be helpful to look a little more closely at the ideas espoused by the two more important of the three, Rawls and Dewey. Dewey was obsessed with the idea of critical thinking, or as he preferred to call it, reflective thinking. The key to Dewey's pragmatism was the belief in the idea that man should not be taught knowledge, but rather should be taught how to attain knowledge on his own. There will be almost a revolution in school education, he wrote, when study and learning are treated not as acquisition of what others know, but as development of capital to be invested in eager alertness in observing and judging the conditions under which one lives. Yes. Whenever I hear this term critical thinking, someone uses this, I think, I don't want to hear anything else from this person. While critical thinking and critical theory are not necessarily related, they both sprang from a common ancestor, that which the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur called the hermeneutics of suspicion, and which the aforementioned American intellectual Roger Kimball called the hermeneutics of contempt. Yes, let's look at Rawls' theory of justice. It's based on two principles, which he spells out as follows. First principle, each person has the same indefeasible claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties, which scheme is compatible with the same scheme of liberties for all. Second principle, social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. They are to be attached to offices and positions open to all conditions of fair equality of opportunity. They are to be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society, the difference principle. This is sheer totalitarianism. As I discussed on this live stream many, many times, equality of opportunity is a chimera. It is impossible to achieve and wicked to try. Let's see, liberties. Adequate scheme of equal basic liberties. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that, let's see, we get terms like the female penis. Oh, no, it is my right, it is my liberty as a man identifying as a woman that, of course, I get to use women's bathrooms. American business is been colonized by various organizations, such as the Human Rights Campaign, the largest national lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer civil rights organization, which is just enormously powerful in American business for reasons that are rather obscure, actually. Let's see. The strategy that HRC has mastered in pursuit of its goals of changing corporate America is itself a bit of a wonder. HRC changes its criteria for corporate social responsibility constantly. Its corporate equality index will demand one behavior one year, a different behavior the next year, and then a third behavior altogether the year after that. Moreover, the changes in the index follow no coherent pattern. The variables included sometimes appear perfectly arbitrary. Given this, company ratings can and do change from year to year based solely on random increases or decreases in the points allotted or subtracted for each behavior. Because of the shifting nature of the index's measures, companies that were once considered strong supporters of gay rights can wind up on the opposite end of the spectrum, even as their policies remain unchanged or have even improved by the old variables measures. This is no mere coincidence. Indeed, it is a time-tested strategy on the political left for maintaining relevance. In his 1963 classic, Conjectures and Refutations, The Growth of Scientific Knowledge, Karl Popper noted that Marxism's repeated failures forced its defenders to adopt an old soothsayer's trick, whereby they predict things so vaguely that the predictions can hardly fail, that they become irrefutable. In some of its earlier formulations, for example, in Marx's analysis of the character of the coming social revolution, their predictions were testable and, in fact, falsified. Yet instead of accepting the refutations, the followers of Marx reinterpreted both the theory and the evidence in order to make them agree. This old soothsayer's trick is employed with crude, blunt force by HRC. It tells companies that corporate policies X, Y, and Z will produce powerful progress for the alphabet people community, but changes its explanations the next year, saying that policies A, B, and C are the real keys to powerful progress for the alphabet people community. In doing so, it ensures that powerful progress is never achieved, meaning that it is always important to keep working and striving toward that goal. That's called moving the goalpost, and HRC makes itself perpetually relevant while also making the corporations that support the corporate equality index perpetually submissive as well as perpetually generous. Now, yes, you hear this. This is just commonplace in business, that business needs to be more diverse. Well, like the Army, the Special Forces need to be more diverse. Well, why? Why do they need to be more diverse? Well, because they will be better. Well, how so will they better? Will they become more profitable, more efficient? No, it's just stated. No, yes, this is a good thing. See, diversity is good in and of itself. It's a positive good. So companies which embrace diversity are going to be better. I actually interviewed a woman some years ago who pushed, she made it her living, was on pushing this line that the mining industry needs more women in it. And, oh, yes, it's going to make a big difference. It's going to make the mining industry so much more successful. Oh, and studies and studies and studies. She was not persuasive to me because it was not explained in any particular how, say replacing men with women, we're going to make the mining industry better. Eric Holder pops up in this book, that odious man who has done very well, very, very well for himself. He was Attorney General of the United States under Barack Obama. And he's as woke as all get out. However, in a particular case, the bank, HSBC, his own Justice Department said that it committed crimes, serious crimes, that it had done business with Iran, which is considered terrorism in the United States, and it had laundered money for Mexican drug cartels. Eric Holder decided there would not be a criminal prosecution. Why? Because it would impugn trust in the banking system, which in turn would impugn trust in the economy. Sukup writes, by most measures, one would likely conclude that as Attorney General, Holder went very easy on the large Wall Street firms that precipitated the great financial collapse. His Justice Department won 0 convictions in court, and they actually tried only a few small-time cases. Yes, too big. If a company was too big to fail, then its executives, directors, and employees were too big to jail as well. In a column penned after Holder had announced that he was leaving DOJ to return to his private legal practice at Covington and Burling, Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi explained Holder's exceptional value to the Wall Street big boys. Here's a man who just spent 6 years handing out soft-touch settlements to practically every too-big-to-fail bank in the world. Now he returns to a firm that represents many of those same companies, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Chase, Bank of America, and Citigroup, to name a few. His service was certainly worth many billions of dollars to Wall Street. John Milius, the film director, who is considered, ultra right-wing, he had a rather different view of what should be done after 2007, 2008. He said in an interview, I was watching Rush Limbaugh the other night and I was horrified. I would have Rush Limbaugh drawn and quartered. He was sticking up for these Wall Street pigs. There should be public show trials, mass denunciations, and executions. Well, it's long been fascinating to me that something short of that, but an attempt to rein in Wall Street, to punish it for its greed and stupidity and licentiousness, would have been overwhelmingly popular with the American people, and Barack Obama could have easily bullied the Democratic Party in supporting that, but instead, he did nothing. And guess who is said to probably be the first billionaire ex-president? Why, that would be Barack Obama as well. China. What these woke capitalists want to do is they want to destroy political freedom in the United States. However, they all love China. They all love China. I guess it could be because there is no political freedom in China. And Apple, which is perhaps one of the most obnoxious of the woke capital behemoths, is particularly close to China. Planned obsolescence is a consistent case made against Apple, largely because building Apple's products requires the use of considerable natural resources, chief among them being cobalt. Lithium-ion batteries are built using cobalt, and 60% of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Needless to say, neither the government of the DRC nor its primarily Chinese importers are especially concerned about labor laws or practices. In December 2019, Apple was one of 5 American companies named in a lawsuit filed by international rights advocates, a Washington, D.C.-based human rights law firm, on behalf of 14 parents and children from the DRC. According to The Guardian, the lawsuit, which is the result of field research conducted by anti-slavery economist Siddharth Kara, accuses the companies of aiding and abetting in the death and serious injury of children who they claim were working in cobalt mines in their supply chains. According to the suit, the children were working illegally for the British mining company Glencore. Glencore sold all its cobalt to Umicore, a Belgian company, which then supplied battery-grade cobalt to Apple, Google, Tesla, Microsoft, and Dell. Among the contentions in the suit was the claim that Apple et al. Knew that their cobalt was coming from mines using child labor. The DRC lawsuit is hardly the first time Apple has been accused of profiting from child labor. Apple has admitted several times to discovering that some of its contractors use child labor to find its employees under 16 years old. Yes, you may have seen that there was a piece published by the Cato Institute a few days ago. 3 cheers for sweatshops. Yes. So I don't know, when we talk about the right and its opposition to behemoth capitalism, you're not going to get the same opinions from the right, because, well, I suppose there is a genuine right, and then there are the whores for woke capital, which is everything associated with the coctopus are merely whores for billionaires. I was really struck by the parts in this book that talk about the tremendous influence of index funds like BlackRock, that their power in American business, based on their substantial ownership amongst many of America's most famous companies, is pretty much unparalleled. And this is, I can only see this as restraint of trade. Again, as I started, I think for our society to survive in a means that is, well, to some extent livable, bearable, tolerable, these big companies, they have to be smashed, because they do not like us, to put it mildly. They would clearly adopt a Chinese model if they could get away with it. If Google and the like found a way to institute a social credit scheme on us in the West, they would gladly, gleefully even, do so. I like this book quite a lot, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. It is quite well written, which was a very nice surprise, actually. And I learned a great deal about the problem that I did not know. And actually, this is what I look forward to in books of this type. As I've mentioned previously, tell me something I don't know. And this book told me a lot that I do not know. So I highly recommend it. Final look at the chat. Roulette Crack says it's so weird that they are defending sweatshops and supporting endless foreign wars under the guise of women's rights, very revealing which segment of the population they are targeting: white women. Let's see. KMG, suggestion for the book club: American Pilgrim. Okay. American Pilgrim. Whores for Woke Capital. Yeah, I'll write that down. American Pilgrim. People make these suggestions, and I often forget them. But Eddie Coyle is going to be added to the list today. So the letter was a favorite of Archie Bunker. Excellent review, KMG. I just got the sample, says MF Superstar. Well, thank you. Ernst Junger. There's a problem with translations there, and the book's being revised, but I will look into it. Jim Smith, that was the 1970s, and Archie Bunker was a right-wing buffoon, says Texas Feral Hog. Well, you see, they had the same problem with All in the Family. Norman Lear did, that the British show that it was based on, that these men, Archie Bunker, and I can't remember the name of the British character, they were so overwritten, so, overdrawn, that, the audiences in Britain and the United States are going to regard these figures with loathing. And, if I vote for Richard Nixon, that makes me an Archie Bunker, so I can't vote for Richard Nixon. Instead, the opposite happened. And in both these countries, these rednecks became beloved. Beloved. So what is coming up on Culture-Wise? On Monday, on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about classical crossover, threat or menace. On the book club next week, I'm going to be talking about Andy Ngo's expose of Antifa, and it's called Unmasked. And as previously mentioned on Theater Thursday, next week I'm discussing Bong Joon-ho's 2019 film Parasite. So that's it for the week. Thank you all for listening, tuning in. If you like the show, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. And I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, which would be very much appreciated, especially in this time of great uncertainty in my life, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to this live stream can be made directly via Interac to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.